Sun Tzu, Chapter 2. Waging War. Look at a siege ladder, the kind used to climb city walls. It's not just wood and rope, it's payroll, food, transport, metal, and time. Look at a suit of warring states' armor. It's not just protection, it's a bill the state must pay before the first arrow flies. Sun Tzu's Chapter 2 is the part most people skip, and it's the part that ruins careless leaders. Because he doesn't talk about glory, he talks about cost. And he warns you, a long war doesn't just kill soldiers, it eats the state. Chapter 2 is usually translated as waging war, and it feels like a hard hand on your shoulder. In Chapter 1, Sun Tzu tells you to measure war before you commit. He pushes you toward cold judgment, toward planning that sees the outcome before the bloodletting begins. The message is simple. If you can't assess reality, you don't deserve victory. Chapter 2 deepens that judgment. It takes the same ruthless mindset and points it at something leaders love to ignore. Money, food, transport, time. Sun Tzu treats war like a machine. You can power that machine. You can even steer it. But you cannot pretend it runs on courage alone. Start with the basic reality. War is expensive because mobilization is expensive. The course guidebook makes this point bluntly. Chapter 2 describes the costs of mobilizing an army of 100,000 soldiers. That number is already staggering, and by the end of the 3rd century BCE, armies could be far larger, so large that states might put a fifth or more of their adult men under arms. At that scale, war isn't a raid, it's an industrial act. Feeding it requires communications, transportation, and record-keeping. Bureaucracy that can move people and supplies, not just speeches that move hearts. The Cambridge History explains why this matters in the warring states setting. Infantry armies, built from peasant households, replaced the older dominance of a warrior nobility. That shift, and the kind of mass service it demanded, changed military composition, armaments, scale, and control. You see the world Sun Tzu is speaking into. Huge forces, massive demands, systems strained to the limit. Now add the next reality. War doesn't only cost money. It consumes morale and social stability. The guidebook says it plainly. Waging war disrupts the lives of soldiers and their families, and even the lives of millions of subjects. That's not decoration. That's the strategic core. When war stretches out, it doesn't stay over there. It comes home as exhaustion, shortages, resentment, and a public that stops believing in the project. So Chapter 2 draws a straight line from cost to collapse. If you pay too much, too long, you don't just risk losing the campaign. You risk hollowing out the state that funds it. This is why speed matters. Not speed for style, not speed to look heroic. Speed because every day of war is a burn rate. Every day the machine eats. Every day the bill grows. Every day the state's patience and strength get thinner. So when Sun Tzu presses for decisiveness, it isn't impatience. It's accounting. Now let's get concrete, because Sun Tzu is concrete. Chapter 2 turns your attention to logistics, how an army gets fed, equipped, and kept functional. The guidebook calls this out directly. It says a dramatic expansion in logistics was central to ancient China's military revolution, and that much of Chapter 2 is devoted to finance and supply. It even uses a sharp phrase. The authors are commodifying conflict. That's exactly right. In this chapter, war stops looking like ceremony and starts looking like material flow. And here's the brutal rule that follows. In war, the side with the longer purse usually prevails. Not always, but usually. That's why leaders who ignore logistics don't just make mistakes, they design defeat. But Sun Tzu adds a twist. A state can't rely only on its own storehouses forever. Yes, an army begins with what it brought: arms, armor, and initial food rations from its own stores. But after that, the smart move is to feed the army from the enemy. Take their supplies, consume their resources, force them to carry your weight while they starve under it. The guidebook explains the advantage clearly. Taking food from the enemy simplifies the supply chain. It also magnifies material stress on the opponent. The strategy doesn't just support you, it damages them. This is economic warfare, not just battlefield violence. Now pause and think like Sun Tzu. This is not a nice idea. It's not trying to be. It's trying to be correct. If war disrupts millions of lives, then dragging your own people deeper into that disruption, when you could shift the burden onto the enemy, is strategically foolish. It burns your legitimacy and your capacity at the same time. This is where warring states context makes the chapter feel inevitable. The Cambridge history describes growing reliance on technology, especially in siege warfare. It mentions cloud ladders used to scale city walls, depicted on a bronze basin, and also mining tunnels dug under walls to break in or bring walls down. Defenders responded with large bellows, technology from iron smelting, to pump smoke into tunnels and suffocate attackers. In other words, war in this era is not only men with spears. It's specialized equipment, engineering, and sustained operations against fortified places. That kind of fighting bleeds resources fast, and once siege warfare enters the picture, the pressure of time becomes sharper. Walls don't get tired, people do. Treasuries do. This is one reason the live-off-the-enemy logic matters so much. If the campaign turns into a long grind, your supply problem becomes your fate. The Cambridge history also describes the scale problem directly. Warring states' armies were far larger than earlier spring and autumn forces. That expansion was enabled by the shift from chariot nobles to mass infantry. Infantry required less training and expense per soldier, and was more numerous and expendable. The text also notes that recorded numbers can be unreliable and inflated, but they still point to a world of very large forces and heavy administrative strain. So when Sun Tzu talks about cost, he's not being abstract. He's looking at a state that can field enormous armies, and therefore can also ruin itself trying to keep them in the field. Now bring it back to what Chapter 2 is really doing. It is teaching disciplined judgment in a new domain. Chapter 1 taught you to assess the situation, leadership, alignment, terrain, timing, organization. Chapter 2 forces you to add one more ruthless layer. Can your state afford the war you're about to start? Not just in silver, in food, in labor, in social stability, in the lives that get disrupted long after the banners come down. And if you're listening closely, Sun Tzu is also protecting you from a common lie. The lie is elegant delay. The lie says, if we wait, we'll find the perfect moment. Or, if we keep it going, they'll break. Sometimes that's true. But Chapter 2 warns you that the longer you drag the burden, the more it lands on your own shoulders. And once your own people are exhausted, your strategy collapses from the inside. Now, one more key point that matters for Chapter 2's voice. Sun Tzu is not preaching cruelty for cruelty's sake. He is arguing that the moral burden of war is exactly why leaders must be practical. Because the costs hit soldiers, families, and millions of subjects. A ruler and a general carry responsibility to think clearly and act decisively. If you start war casually, you are not bold, you are negligent. That's the chapter's pressure. It's not romantic, it's not theatrical. It's a warning written for leaders who control lives they can't replace. War is a machine that burns resources and people. The longer you run it, the more it burns you. So you plan with discipline, you move with purpose, you guard your supply, and you shift the burden onto the enemy. Because exhausting your own state is the fastest road to defeat.